Text your dirty tax secrets to Tatiana. Don't worry, she won't tell anyone. Everyone's got 'em, right? Tatiana Sawyer is a tax and business strategist, CPA, and MBA who makes your life less taxing. She helps to reduce your taxes legally so that you make and keep more of your money. Get her second opinion discovery without leaving your current accountant. She'll identify missed opportunities and recommend a cure. Visit TatianaSawyer.com to learn more.
Today is highly planned for.
Super planned.
Yeah, extremely thought out. We've talked to you, Tara, before on the podcast, and you're a 2-time guester now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The first time we had you on, we kind of talked a little bit about a lot of things. Specifically, we talked a little bit about relationships, into attachment style, how that translates into relationships, all this. I want to talk to you because I have some questions, and I know Kelsey will too. Just about when people are in relationships and they start to bring about more awareness, whether it's just, within themselves, within their partner, and then together as a duo, what that looks like when people actually start to grow and evolve in a relationship.
Hi, I'm Kasey, and right here beside me is Kelsey. We are licensed professional counselors, mothers, entrepreneurs, and besties. We know firsthand what it's like to wake up one day and think, how in the heck did I wind up here?
Through our own journeys of self-discovery, we found that joy is something that has to be pursued through internal work. Now we are on a mission to help women from all walks of life understand themselves more so they can have real lasting joy.
Join us every Thursday to hear fun and insightful interviews with experts who can point you toward self-discovery and fulfillment.
I'm sure there has to be this shift of like, okay, this is a shit show. We're going to do all these things, which is really hard. And it takes a lot of energy and effort. But then it's almost like people would turn a corner, right? Like where things start to happen in the relationship where they're like, oh, like I responded differently than I normally would. And I like this outcome so much better, that kind of thing. So I guess I'm kind of wanting to focus a little bit and ask a little bit more about not necessarily just the work that goes into it, but as it starts to pay off, what that does and what that looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's interesting. One, I think anything in relationships is interesting. So maybe I'm not a good judge of what's interesting. But two, I think it's interesting because the concept that comes to mind is the perspective. So sentiment override is technically the language, but Gottman's call it perspective. It's like positive or negative perspective. And so your perspective is a perceptual filter. So it's not about like what objectively has happened. It's about the way that I am sort of encoding or seeing what's happened. And it's not something that's within my control. And so that to me is the interesting piece, is that my perceptual filter, again, Bob Weiss coined the phrase sentiment override. I think in other research, they call it, well, it's not exactly the same, but a related concept is relational attribute, something like that. And then in Gottman world, it's perspective. And so any information coming in gets basically put through this filtration process. And that filtration process is the thing that I can't control. And it's either positive or negative. And it like codes the message in either a positive or a negative way. And then it lands. And so as an example, maybe we talked about this a little bit last time. I don't actually know. But as an example, if you were to say something like, hey, Kelsey, what are we going to do for dinner? And if Kelsey were to hear something to the effect of like, she's asking me, like, it's my responsibility to make dinner. Well, screw you. It's you make, I don't know. What do you want to do? Like, I'm not making dinner. You make dinner. The ask itself, what are we doing for dinner, is basically neutral. Like if I were to look at that on paper and it's done in sort of this neutral tone, we could say it's a neutral ask. It's not something positive, meaning like, you're not saying, hey, you look so good today. That would be like positive, right? But it's neutral. It's like a neutral ask, but it's coded as negative. What's interesting to your question is that your perception of what is working or what is not is also going to be influenced by the filter. And so it's tricky, because if I were to ask you, if you were happy in your relationship and I were to say, tell me about how the two of you met, or tell me about how you got through hard times, your answers are literally different than if you were in an unhappy place in your relationship. Mm-hmm. So I would say if you were, and this is of course like theoretical for me, like my answer to this is a little more theoretical. I'm not saying this is grounded in research necessarily, but for me, a marker for a turning point in a relationship is going to be that positive filtration system, that positive filtration process. That filter is also influenced by, at the bottom layer, a friendship system, which is comprised of three things. And then also your conflict. And so your conflict system, your ability to manage conflict effectively in your relationship. My love is to focus on conflict always, because I think if you do that, you're not only building out a friendship system like inadvertently, but you're also like hitting at the perspective. Other people do it a little bit differently, which is fine. But I think that the point at which you can start to notice the positive things, to me, would indicate the turning point, or one of the turning points, because you are probably shifting into a more positive perspective, which is again, that filtration process. And then also you are like in noticing the positive things, you're actively like building a positive culture in your relationship, which also influences that perspective, but is kind of like different from perspective. So
does conflict normally come from that filter piece? Because I feel like a lot of, like, if I'm thinking of mine and Casey's relationship, it comes from this place of like that negative filter. Like, it's not actually what I meant. It could have been like, what do you want for dinner? And it could be flipped like that. And it doesn't happen very often, but I almost, it's this huge misunderstanding most of the time.
Well, okay. So if we're going to talk about conflict, and we're going to talk about it with me. Okay. So normally what I find myself saying to Kelsey, and I've noticed it in myself as well, because I've been paying attention, but normally she will say something. It doesn't even, like you said, it doesn't have to be negative or anything like that. It's just neutral. And then I will then say something back, but she has a tendency to, like, she takes things personally. Like, it could be a blanket statement about children in general. And in her mind, she's like, oh, are you talking about my kid? Like, we're just talking about kids. Like, it's not, you know what I'm saying? Like, it tends to go very personal very quickly. And then there's a whole demeanor shift. And then I'm like, what's wrong? Which I know what's wrong, but I just want to see if she'll tell me. That's, I think, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, just like certain things like that. Or, yeah, it's just like small things. And it's almost like we take it to this like personal place of negative filter.
Yeah, I think what makes it complicated, I think it's like simple, but then it's layered. So maybe not complicated, but there can be more than one thing happening. So it could be between the two of you, you have a shared history of this thing equals this thing equals this thing. Like you've lived out, maybe I'm assuming you've like argued about kids, you're parenting together. Like, of course, there's like arguments about kids and how we discipline or how we parent or what we think or whatever. So then if you have an argument about a child, you're not just like responding to what's happening in real time. You're also responding to all of the other like lived experiences of parenting children with the person that you're talking with about children now. Yeah. So it might be that it is just it could be simple. The answer is like, yeah, it could just probably be a filtration process, a filtration system, because if you're coding it in a way that's negative, like if it's a neutral statement, it's being coded negative, I would say, yeah, like largely that's going to be perceptual filter. That doesn't mean that there's not something there to be talked about though. So even if it's a perceptual filter, and let's say that it is a negative perceptual filter, what that does not equal is that immediately like negating any need for further conversation about the thing that is coming up. Yeah. If that makes sense. Okay, cool. So that feels like important, because it's like your filter is just negative. Like, fuck off. Like, no. Like, that's not, I know you're not saying that, but like, just in case anybody's like hearing it that way, it's like, no, that's not it.
And a lot of times we have to, Kasey and I specifically, we have to like think about the origin of where that's coming from, like where that feeling or that like there's always an origin to whatever it is that you're responding to.
Do you think that certain people, and I'm, Kelsey can talk about me because she deals with me every day, but I'm going to talk about her in exchange. Yeah. She's very quick to go, like I said, to the defense about, like, I know what she's thinking. Like, oh, do you think I did something wrong? Like, did I, like, are you saying that it's always like, am I wrong? Do you think that I did something bad? Or, it's always that. That's always what it relates back to, where is I don't necessarily like the things that I would get defensive over are totally opposite than the things that she would get defensive over. I don't get defensive over children. I don't like, you could tell me my kid's a little fucker. Yeah, he is sometimes. Like, it's just fine.
Yeah.
But I would get defensive about other things that she probably wouldn't get defensive about. But there was a time where when we would argue, it would almost just be like one argument connecting to the next argument. It's just almost like there's one big argument. And we don't do that. We haven't done that for a long time, thank God.
It's exhausting.
Yeah. But I think we had a lot of things to actually figure out, because that's why the conflict wasn't really resolving, is because we weren't actually coming up with any form of a solution, or we hadn't just agreed that, okay, this is just a conversation we're just going to continue to have for as long as it takes.
I think there's like having the same argument over and over again. I think that, or not the same argument over and over again, but what you said, Kelsey, like going to the origin, it's just, to me, it's the same thing. Like clients will come in and I'll think to myself and I'll say to them, or even like people that I'm supervising who are working with couples, literally, I don't care. All roads lead to Rome. Like it doesn't matter what somebody talks about, because the origin story is going to come up. Like, what is the thing? Like, what's their thing? So whatever Kelsey might be getting defensive about, or Kasey, whatever you're getting, like it's going to be like the same across the board. Like whether it's parenting or work or family or sex or finances, or doesn't matter. Like that feeling, there's probably going to be a few of them, right? Like a few core things. It's going to be the same. And so if you can get to, in my mind, if you can like get to that, and then you just start talking directly about that thing, it's a very different conversation. Like something happening related to kids, and me feeling and I don't know, Kelsey, I'm assuming you agree with what Kasey is saying. So let's just say this is what, okay. That's like, like just deferring to Kasey, like, well, she knows. And it's like, well, hell, Kelsey might be like, that's not right, bitch, but let's say it's accurate. Kelsey agrees also. Let's say that something happens related to parenting. You get a little bit defensive and start to think, well, I haven't done anything wrong, or maybe, whatever it might be, whatever the internal narrative is, there's going to be something else underneath that, like that defensiveness piece, whatever it's hiding. I don't even need you to disclose, but if it's something like powerlessness or inadequacy, or just really feeling like you don't belong, or like whatever it might be, like that's actually the conversation. Like, damn, Kasey, you said this thing, it brought this up in me.
Which actually makes sense, because when I did EMDR personally, like for myself, I was talking about my dad, like how it led back to not feeling good enough, like as a parent, like, am I doing this? And it was weird because I didn't see the connection at all when I started EMDR. And then, your mind will lead the session, and it definitely led the session. Right? So it's cool how sometimes those things will show up and you don't even intend for them to, but then you have conversations around that origin piece.
Yep. Yeah. And this is from people who are doing work. Like there are plenty of people who aren't doing the internal digging. One, they're not comfortable. Two, they don't know how. Three, they literally can't handle the distress of doing it. And so they like look at the top level, like, well, don't say that thing to me anymore, and that would fix the problem. Probably not. Like in this very specific hyper context, like, yeah, that would fix the problem, but it won't. Like that sense of whatever, shame, inadequacy, like abandonment, who cares, whatever it is, it still lives inside of you. And so that doesn't have to be a problem, but it needs to be part of the conversation. Like it's here. Let's just like welcome it, even if it doesn't feel very good. Like it still literally lives there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also, I don't know a lot about couples counseling. That's just not something I ever studied much or practiced at all. But I just think a lot about people and how they handle conflict within a relationship, and how sometimes it can, because I've done this, I would confuse avoidance with conflict resolution, or I don't really know how to explain it. Like there were things that I would just say, oh, I'm just going to let that go. But that was actually avoidance.
Yes.
And now whenever I'm like, I'm just going to let that go, it's actually something that I can just let go. It's not something that, like, I don't know. Kelsey, do you remember yelling at me in the middle of the night, like 2 nights ago?
No.
Were you asleep or drunk? Like,
I'm a hard sleeper. I remember nothing unless I don't know.
Well, funny, yeah. I haven't even said anything to her about it until now. This is the first she's ever heard of it.
So funny, yeah.
But yeah, so we get into a little rift sometimes at bedtime because I have to sleep with the TV off. Like, I cannot sleep with the TV on. And he's one of these people that's like laying there, passed out, snoring, and I go to turn the TV off, and she's like, "I'm watching that." Like, actually, you're not.
You're asleep. Like, this is, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was one of those situations, and she's like sprawled out on her stomach, laying across this little bed in this cabin we just stayed at. And I'm like barely over here on the side, hanging off. The TV's on blast. The room is tiny, so the whole room is like bright, lit up like Christmas. Yeah. We don't have a fan with us because we didn't bring one. She had the cell phone charger, and so she was supposed to turn the fan on her cell phone. And anyway, like, I go to turn off the TV. She tells me I'm watching it. I'm like, okay. So then I wait about 30 minutes. She's snoring. TV is blasting, but she is also watching Netflix on her phone. So she's got...
Oh my God. The TV was on mute.
Oh.
So, yeah. So she's getting the sound from the phone, the light from the TV, and I'm just laying there, like... So wait about 30 more minutes, try to turn it off again. No. She's like, I'm watching that. I'm watching that. I'm watching that. I'm like, okay. Wait about 30 more minutes. And I don't even say anything because I'm like, okay, maybe she's too tired to comprehend. So I'm not going to ask her to do it. I'm just going to reach over and do it myself.
I do not remember any of this.
Oh my God. Do you remember waking up and I'm in a separate bedroom?
Yeah, I mean, I did. I just don't remember what happened. So
okay.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm reaching to get it because I'm just going to turn on the thing. And she yells at me, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Where's your phone?" Because it's kind of like stuck under. I don't know. Go get your own phone. Like, raises up in the bed and screams at me.
Gosh. Nighttime Kelsey.
Normally, that would have been a fight. Like, I would have woke her up and been like, "You're not going to talk to me like that."
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? I'm going to go sleep over here. And that's what I did. And then I'm pissed. Like, I'm laying there just like fuming mad. But I'm sitting there thinking, okay, she probably doesn't even realize what she did. Because at this point, if she knows I'm not in the room and she knows that she just screamed at me, she's going to have already come in here and been like, something. And she didn't do any of those things. And so I was like, she's probably just asleep. I'm just going to lay here. We'll just see. And then the next morning, she just comes in the bed, just bebopping off, like nothing ever happened. Yeah. I'm like, she really didn't remember, which then I kind of felt better because I was like, if she really yelled at me like that, she's either avoiding this conversation that we need to be having right now, or she just really doesn't remember.
Yeah.
And
I mean, me like that often. I mean, I could see myself doing that if I was like sleeping and waking up and just doing it. Like the other night when there was a thunderstorm and I was like, "Kasey, what is that?" And you're like, "I was sleeping."
Yeah, but I just, like that situation alone just kind of made me reflect on myself. And I'm thinking, okay, 3 years ago, I would have responded much differently to that. But I was able to kind of think about it more from her perspective and then thought, okay, like, we can talk about this tomorrow. Like, if this is actually a thing. So, Kelsey, you better not ever yell at me like that again.
I will try my darnest.
I was going to say, till nighttime Kelsey. Like, no more yelling. Sleepy time Kelsey.
When we're at home, we set like a timer. We have like whole system. And I feel like anytime we travel, it sets off the system. Like, I do have a question though. And it's kind of different than this. I am very sorry that I yelled at you.
Thank you.
I'm curious, Tara, what are your thoughts on, like, sometimes people have a difficult time being in the calm, like they create chaos for themselves? What's your take on that, and where does that come from?
I don't know enough about nervous systems to talk with any level of depth about this. I know that something being familiar doesn't mean that it's calm, but
Yeah.
familiar is comfortable because we know it well. And so for people who are used to dysregulation, when you remove that, like if their bodies have grown up in dysregulated places, or there's abuse or neglect or abandonment or a lot of conflict, like it's not good for kids to see a lot of heavy conflict. It's not good for kids to see a lot of conflict, Some, if there's repair, I think can be, it's like minimal and then there's repair after. That can be, I don't know about healing, but that can like be helpful for them to learn how to like navigate and bear witness to, but like not big conflicts necessarily. Anyway, so like as a kid, if they're seeing that and it's dysregulating, it doesn't feel safe necessarily. And so your body's growing up in that chaotic sort of environment, you just know that feeling well. And so then when you take that person and drop them and, pluck them out of there and drop them into something that's quote safe or like a little more stable or baseline, stable or like closer to baseline in terms of regulation, less big swings. I just don't think it feels good. It's confusing. It's not safe because they don't know what to expect. They don't know, like their body's not used to being in a calm state. And so it might actually feel further dysregulating potentially, or I don't know about that for sure. I'm thinking too, it might feel boring to people. Like we hear about people talking about like someone stable is boring. It could feel boring for someone who's used to big swings and they get out of it and they're with somebody and there's like the monotony of a romantic relationship. It's kind of fucking boring sometimes, and that boredom can feel like something is wrong when nothing is necessarily wrong. It's just not being used to that. That's my like broad answer. I wish I was more. I'm just not. Again, I couldn't talk to you.
Does that show up a lot for you? Like when you're working with couples, like that kind of, maybe one's not used to like that close to baseline, that regulation?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think most couples actually end up partnering with somebody who is close to their regulatory norm. You know what I'm saying? So I might have like two couples or two people that are chaotic, like they're used to chaos together. And like that's the norm. And so then they're both not only feeding into this, but also they're used to it. It's sort of comfortable. I don't even necessarily mean with each other, but like can also be with each other. I mean, I get way less secure attachment folks in my practice just because I'm like high conflict. So I'm not going to get a lot of people who are like very strongly securely attached coming in. Or you get people who, again, like maybe one partner avoidant, one partner preoccupied. But even then, if you were to hook them up to like some sort of like physiological measure, it looks pretty similar. And so like you're talking about like from an internal like physiological perspective, it might be the quote same, even though the external presentation is going to look very different. And so I don't really feel like if I'm working with someone who's avoidant and like the partnership, one tends to avoid, one tends to be anxious, preoccupied. I'm not seeing them as very different. I'm seeing what they do in response to excessive physiological overwhelm. I'm seeing that as different. But like internally, I think that they probably both feel anxious about similar things and how they respond is just going to look different externally.
I've witnessed that quite a bit. I've also been that when I was younger, like I gravitated more toward people that there was a lot of chaos in the relationship because that's all I knew, that just felt more normal. Now, I think a lot of maturity and all of that has come into play, and that is a big red flag to me. Obviously, I don't want that. And there we do have people in our lives that are, in those high stress, high conflict relationships, and no thanks. No thanks. Sometimes I do think people it's just kind of like I don't want to say a phase, but sort of kind of like a phase for some people whenever they're younger. So maybe it's why people say girls go after bad boys. I don't know. Maybe that's a similar component. They don't want anyone that's going to treat them right because too nice or friend zone or any of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know enough also, I think about from like an evolutionary perspective, we're talking about like evolutionary psychology, or I know there's something around, I'm going to butcher this. So I'm not even sure if I want to go there. Something around like 10% of the population, let's just say let's just go binary sex to be, because I think that they did this with binary sex, or maybe with treating gender as binary. 10% of the population, 90% of the other, and heterosexual couples, probably even I don't even know if this would be same gender or same. My guess is it would actually generalize across sexuality, but 10% of the population is wanted by 90% of the other party, the group that wants them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think about that, going for the bad boy, so to speak, or going for someone who's very highly, even from a economy, right? Supply and demand, there's someone that's very highly desirable, or a person is, they have a lot more leeway. They can just kind of do what they want. And so, yeah, I don't know. I don't have any finalized thoughts on this. I'm just oh, that's interesting. I wonder if ... Wonder what that means. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities, I think, in that scenario. I just keep coming back to, we have to be diligent and open to becoming more self-aware, because I think self-awareness is kind of one of those foundational components of all change, whether it's change individually, change as a couple, change as a family relationship, any sort of change. Without that self-awareness piece, sometimes her and I will kind of get on a rampage about just people that just annoy us, or, situations that are just annoying to us. And it's the common denominator in all of those scenarios is a lack of self-awareness. It's just really when people don't have self-awareness, that the likelihood for change or resolution to conflict is virtually non-existent.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think it's different to have the willingness to work on the self-awareness. If you're committed to that piece of change, but I know a lot of people, they don't have that drive or that want. And I think it would take something really big to drive them there.
I think about people being receptive to feedback. And then I think about also people being motivated to change, or having any desire to work towards change, or any interest in working hard at something. Some people are not hardworking, literally, just based on population. There's going to be people that are very hardworking, the average, and then people that are very not hardworking. And so if you've got somebody who's not really working, they're just sort of floating along, life is fine, and then you're saying, hey, this is a problem. This needs to, this is a problem for this reason. They might not change. Maybe they can take that in, but they're not actually interested in doing anything about it.
I will say this. I mean, I've been in a relationship like that where it was very almost, whether the person realized it or was conscious of it or not at the time, it was very malicious. It felt very manipulative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you caught me. I'm wrong. I promise it'll never happen again. Here's what I'm going to do, without ever changing. And I can honestly say, there's not been a lot of things that I've had to say to Kelsey, and this is important to me. This is going to require some form of effort in one way or another. And there's never been a time where she said, okay, I'm going to commit to this change, and then not follow through with it. For the most part, the big stuff, little stuff, different. But
I think even that example though is interesting, because when I hear somebody yeah, you got me. I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm never gonna do that again. I'm so sorry. I promise I'll change. And then it ends there. That to me is avoidance. Tell me more. What happened? How did this go wrong? Tell me how you feel. What was going on for you? And this is where, for me, I'm a dog with a bone. If I don't understand something, it's really hard for me to let it go. So if I don't really know why you did this thing, because also there's probably something motivating for the other, regardless of what the motivation is. I'm not saying they're really motivated, but if there's that internal stuff that we were talking about earlier, that it's going to show up again, let's just say neglect for me or something. It's not, but let's say that it is. If that neglect or powerlessness is a thing for me. So if I feel that way, and that's why I did a behavior, but you're telling me not to do it again because you didn't like it. Now I'm saying, okay, I'll never do it again because I also have a fear of abandonment. Well, I'm going to do it again. If it was driven by powerlessness, I'm absolutely going to do something like that again. And now I'm going to be entrenched in shame, and I can't talk about it. And, that's me not knowing myself or me not knowing how to navigate that conversation with another person. So it dies. And then it's going to go poorly and we've never actually talked through what we need to talk through.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot let that go. That's hard for me to let go of. And well, probably in life period, which that's not a problem with Steve and I. So it's not something that like him saying, I'll never do it again. And then he just says, Tara, I can't change that. And then we have a whole different conversation, like picking his clothes up or something in the bathroom. Like
that's kind of like where I come from. I think that sometimes those promises that are made aren't even attainable. Like, I promise I will never do that again. Is that even attainable?
Yeah. In a lot of cases, it might not be sometimes. But even then, how do you say never to doing something? The only thing you can never say that you're going to do is be alive forever. Like, no, you're going to fucking die. Everyone's going to die. So that's it. Like, I'll never do this thing. You don't know that for sure. But what is something you could do? Like, you could work really hard, or you could do this instead, or you could, we also talk about in Gottman methodology, they really heavily emphasize positive needs. So instead of saying what you won't do, you say what you will do. Sort of like operant conditioning, positive in terms of that language. You're focusing on like the addition of something rather than, whether it's good or bad. So I will do this instead. That's one big thing. Like, never doing something is not helpful information. Tell me what can take the place of the thing. Tell me what can take the place of the thing. And if I know something needs to take the place of another behavior, then I also need to know what function that other behavior served, because I'm going to need this new thing to serve a similar function. It has to meet a need that I maybe don't know yet, or haven't voiced yet, or whatever.
Yeah. I think back about so many conflicts that I've had throughout my life, and it never went to the root. It never went to, okay, why is it? What's the feeling behind this? Like, what's going on? Never. Because, when you're in that argument, you don't necessarily think like that. And so it's hard without having some form of coaching or training or therapy or experience to even know to get there. I feel like I'm a dog with a bone sometimes about things too. Like, I really have to understand it. And I know sometimes that comes across more in like an accusatory, or like, let me ask a bunch of questions here because I have to wrap my head around this. But that's all I'm really trying to do is just get to a place where I get it,
Yeah, where you can wrap your mind around it.
I was just thinking about the one time that like I was pretty bad at like omitting the truth.
Yeah, let's talk about this.
Yeah, so
you just wouldn't say things?
I just wouldn't say things, and I would just avoid them, and I would get really nervous, and I couldn't figure out
you poor thing. Yeah.
And Kasey brought it up, and she was like, I need you to not do this. Like, this is a huge red flag. Yeah. And I was like, offensive. I was like, so you really think that I'm not an honest person and that I was malicious doing this and like all these things, right? Like taking it to the personal level.
Yeah, sure.
I went to therapy over this, and I was like, why is this so hard for me? But the end result is like, it made me anxious to know how she was going to respond. But as my therapist said, throwing the hat over the fence and just saying it, right? And whatever the outcome is, whatever the outcome, actually made me feel less nervous.
Yeah.
It was a communication thing. I just didn't want to hurt her feelings.
Well, and it was infuriating to me. You think of the relationship that I was coming out of, and here I've got this person that is like really struggling to tell me. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, she's lying to me right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because if she was just telling me the truth, why would this be so hard?
Yeah.
She would say a couple of words. Yeah.
Well, and that was in the very beginning. And I was like, why? Like, why do I feel like it's like I couldn't say it? Like, I don't know what it was. And it wasn't because I wanted to lie or I had anything to hide. It was literally just.
And it wasn't even always over serious matters. Sometimes it was just something simple, like getting coffee.
And I think you have a better understanding because, like, I don't know if you remember, Kasey, when I was talking, you were getting your hair done or something, and you came home like 2 hours later after I'd already been there, and I was talking to one of my friends on the phone. And I thought you were mad at me. I was like, oh my gosh, is she mad at me right now? Like, I don't mean to be like sitting here talking to my friend while she just got home. And she was like, no, just like talk to him. And after I got off the phone, I was like, are you upset with me? And she's like, why would I be upset with you? I was like, because like, wouldn't you want my undivided attention when you come home? Or are you upset because of anything I said on that phone conversation? And,
it was bad.
there's an origin to it, but I just had to understand like what was actually going on. And Kasey was like, I don't understand you. I'm just an overthinker. That's my problem.
What's your Enneagram type? What is it? 9?
What is it, Kasey?
Oh, are you talking about you?
Yeah, about Kelsey.
Kelsey's a 9. And aren't you?
That makes sense.
Yes.
Or are you a 6?
No, I'm not a 6.
You're a 9.
Yeah, I'm a 9.
What are you, Kasey? You're not an 8, but that's like a second. Are you an 8?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. Look at me. I think I probably already knew that, actually. You're rare for a therapist world. Yeah, that makes sense to me. 9s are always preoccupied with like others. Like really, really. Yeah. 8s are bulldogs.
Yeah. In a good, cute way.
It's a good thing. Yeah. I mean, these are both like, it serves you both. 9s and 8s are like,
I have to take up for her, like,
oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Like, don't be mean.
Yeah.
Well, Tara, thank you for joining us today, and we will see you later, besties.
Bye.
Later, besties.
Later, besties.
If you're enjoying our podcast and would like to hear more from us, leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts so we can keep making great content.
Talk to you later, besties.